In the intro to the show each week, I say that we take an uncurated and unapologetic look into physician life on this show. So in this episode, I'm going to get real with you, real about this pandemic, real about what I think one of the major problems is, actually a couple of them, that uniquely sets America up to be ravaged by this disease. And I want to talk about how we can fix it. I'm not going to be holding any punches this show, so strap up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 54 of the Physician Philosopher podcast, where we take an uncurated and unapologetic look into physician life, money, and mindset. So today's thought is this: I've never met a person in my life who was convinced they were wrong by being beat over the head with information. It is time that we stop shaming people who aren't getting vaccinated and start listening so that we can figure out how to solve this problem. So I record my episodes in advance, which, is a really good thing on this episode because it's going to protect patient privacy. But at the time of recording this, in the previous week, I've been involved in intubating multiple patients with COVID. These patients weren't in an ICU. They weren't in an intermediate care unit. They weren't even in an operating room. It was in a community hospital on a regular hospital floor in rooms that are not equipped to have ICU ventilators hooked up to them. Instead, we had to actually use transport ventilators, and then we had to wait. Why? Well, because our hospital system is so ravaged by COVID that these patients can't get transferred to an ICU. Some of them were 20 or 30 people down the list to even make it to an ICU despite being at very high levels of support in terms of their respiratory support. And even after we intubated them, we've had trouble placing them in ICUs for multiple days sometimes. And we're not alone. There have been stories from other hospitals, from other doctors, shared on social media and elsewhere, that there are reports of cancer patients who are having their surgeries delayed or canceled across the country because there are no beds. Like, you can't have hospital systems with no beds have surgeries on patients where they're going to have a hospital stay after surgery when there aren't any beds. And can you stop for a second and imagine being in that family's shoes? Yes, sir, your wife does have cancer. And yes, we do have the ability to take it out. I could continue to grow, but we just can't do the surgery right now. And then they ask why. Well, it's because there's nowhere to put patients after surgery. We don't have anywhere to put your loved one. Like, can you imagine having that conversation? If you're a physician listening to this, odds are you probably can. And if you're a patient or, a nurse that's involved in patient care, you can probably imagine that too, right? Like, what would that feel like? Just being involved in that situation. And talk about the definition of moral injury when you know what to do for a patient. You have the ability, the technique, the talent, the education to be able to do it. But you simply can't because the system can't accommodate that surgery right now. And the thing is that this is so preventable. We know that vaccines at this point cannot prevent all of the disease. We have actually seen breakthrough cases of COVID in vaccinated patients. We've seen vaccinated patients transfer disease to non-vaccinated patients. But we also have really good data that vaccines have remained extremely effective at preventing severe disease in the vast majority of patients. In fact, it's like greater than 90% of the time we are able to prevent severe disease, which is the kind of disease that's requiring me to intubate multiple patients in the last week in a non-ICU setting, something that we would never do during non-pandemic times. I mean, this is a brave new world for those of us in medicine where we have patients in settings we would never let them be in if it weren't for a pandemic overriding and just ravaging our medical system. But right now we don't have a choice. We're doing the best we can. We're calling nonstop to see if we can get patients transferred, and we just can't do it. And this is really heartbreaking because, speaking of the patients that I'm intubating, recently when I spoke to one of them prior to their intubation, they had this fear and understanding in their eyes. And they're like, hey, doc, you got to do what you got to do. Do whatever you need to do. They were tired. They were tired of breathing, of being deprived oxygen. And I'm not going to lie, it's weighed really heavily on me. There have been other times I've put people to sleep and I've intubated them knowing that there's a really good chance I'm going to be the last person to ever talk to them. The last person who can really make them feel like they mattered, that they were important. And yet this is different. It's really different this time because what is happening in this situation right now is preventable something like 90% of the time. And so you can't apply statistics to a single individual, which is what I'm going to get to later in the show, I think a lot of Americans are really struggling with is like this individual decision. And initially this past week, it made me mad. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It made me angry. And it made me mad that people are continuing to die, people that are moms and dads, husbands and wives, sons and daughters. And this is all completely unnecessary. And to be clear, I'm not mad at the patient. I'm really not. I'm not blaming the patient. I'm mad at the system. I'm mad at the situation. I'm mad at our inability as a medical community, a country, a political system to communicate effectively enough to help people make a decision to get a vaccine that could save their lives. It's not about the person who's not getting vaccinated. It's about the information that's getting out there. So I'm going to state this unequivocally. I don't think this is the layperson's fault. And I know that there are a lot of doctors out there, a lot of medical staff out there that are really angry right now about people not getting vaccinated. And while this is a disease predominantly of the unvaccinated at this point, the fault rests squarely on the shoulders of the leaders who have just completely miscommunicated. They've botched the ball and misled people, honestly. And the blame continues to rest on those shoulders, of those who think that shaming someone into something is ever going to work. It never has. It never will. You've never shamed somebody into believing what you believe. Now, that could be politics. It could be religion. It could be medical decisions. Like, that's just not something that ever works. Shaming people into believing something or making a decision that they don't want to make doesn't work. It's the reason why you can spit facts at people all day long and you will not change people's minds. And I know that you're angry. I know this is unnecessary. I know that the vaccine can prevent 90% of this happening and overwhelming our hospital systems where cancer patients can't get the surgeries they need and doctors don't have to be emotionally exhausted and morally injured and burned out. And some are even taking their lives because of this pandemic. But blaming people who don't have your experience and perspective as a physician isn't going to fix this problem. Shaming only causes deeper division and polarization. And honestly, that's exactly what the news and social media echo chambers want, right? So again, let me be clear. I am not shaming anyone who has decided not to get vaccinated. But in my own personal way of dealing with this, of seeing tragedy and of having to intubate people that, are not very old, that are pretty young, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the ethical dilemma that is mandating vaccines in a culture that prides itself on American individualism. And that's what I want to chat about right now. That's what I want to talk about, because I think it's something that we're not having a conversation about, and that a lot of us who are encouraging people to get vaccinated because we're seeing the ravaging and devastating effects later down the road, we're not doing a good enough job of listening. So let's talk about it. Why aren't people getting vaccinated? Why are normal, everyday Americans failing to get a vaccine that we know can save their lives? And fundamentally, it comes down to two reasons. And I really want to talk about the second reason, but I think the first came first, and so we need to talk about this first. The truth is that the CDC and several of other governing bodies and authorities and leaders and politicians have changed their tune multiple times during this pandemic. And at first it was one thing and then another. And then this happened multiple times where they would say one thing out of one side of their mouth, and then, a few months or a couple of weeks later, they would say the exact same contradictory statement. And truthfully, this has probably had more to do with changing evidence as we started to learn more about COVID as it was a novel disease. But think about it. If you're in medicine, place yourselves in the shoes of the regular American people who did not go through medical school. They did not go through residency. They have not been practicing medicine. What did it look like to them? Put yourself in their shoes. When leaders and large healthcare organizations had contradictory statements from their own mouths, from their own bullhorns, hey, we want you to do this, and then months later, nope, actually this is different. This isn't an airborne disease. Oh, wait, but 9 months later it is, right? Wait, you said I don't need a mask, but now I do. But then I don't. But now I do. If you're vaccinated, you can go in public, right? You can live a normal life. Oh, wait, nope, take that back. We learned more information. And so from the regular person's vantage point, they don't know who or what to trust. And you might ask why, and it's because when things were changed, they were not effectively communicated. Most Americans do not appreciate or understand the nuance of a changing body of literature because they aren't in medicine and are not used to critically thinking about scientific data and literature and studies. So when the wires started getting crossed, what did people do when they felt like they couldn't trust the CDC or governing officials? They turned to other sources. They entered their echo chambers where their thoughts would be molded by those they trust, namely news and media sources and social media. And those all exist for one thing. They exist to make money. News organizations, politicians who put their own self-interest first, they are there to make money, to get reelected. They are not there for you. So those news companies don't care about the truth. They honestly care about making a buck. And polarization and divisiveness is good for them. It breeds loyalty among their listeners and their viewers, and loyalty makes money. So right now, as someone who spends a lot of time talking with people about their thoughts as a coach, you may have already, have ideas about what I'm saying. And I haven't even named a news agency. So when I just talked about the echo chambers, if you were, on the right, you're listening to this and thinking like, those, backhanded news agencies on the left. And if you're on the left, you're doing the opposite and blaming the news networks on the right. And that's because we all come in with a narrative and perspective that is shaped by what we listen to and about who we're around. And in today's day and age, with news and social media being the way that it is, it targets you and it forms this echo chamber where you're only surrounded by people who think exactly like you. That's how divided we are as a country, and that's how we got here. It's this us versus them mentality right now where, where have the days gone that we could have a difference of opinion without hating the other side, without shaming them, without thinking like they were a lesser human being? Days like, where Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill was a Democrat and Ronald Reagan was a Republican, and they would hash it out on the debate floor, when they were debating policy and politics, and then go have lunch afterwards. They go have a beer afterwards. They would have a difference of opinion and still respect each other, and they would listen to the other side. Where have those days gone? So this miscommunication around this virus, around COVID, and around the vaccine have devolved into an American political issue where everyone loses. Everyone loses right now. There aren't any winners. And while the shaming and politicization have been a massive issue in our country, I think there's an equally damning problem. In fact, I think this problem's worse, and it has to do with the communication, but it's this idea of putting a mandate of any kind in front of someone who wholeheartedly supports American individualism and autonomy. Because I don't know if you're like me, but like many Americans, I don't like anyone telling me what to do. I don't like governmental overreach, and I think that every man and woman should have the right to choose what is best for them. And this might be why I tend to be libertarian in my political beliefs, and why I can relate to my friends that are on both the left and the right. I tend to be pretty moderate. It depends on the issue. And we see this on both sides of the aisle right now. There have been examples on both sides where an encroachment on individual choice was seen as a threat. I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but could you imagine 5 years ago if I told you that Republicans would be the ones saying, my body, my choice, and that Democrats would disagree? Or that Democrats would back a mandate to force health choices on other people while Republicans were pro-choice? It turns out that Americans simply do not like being told what to do. In fact, when people do that, we often recoil. It's in our DNA. It's in our blood. We like our autonomy, we like our individualism, and we like figuring out what is best for us. That's it, period. Letting someone take our autonomy is about the last thing we ever let happen as Americans. It's the same language that you hear when people talk about taking guns. It's the same language you hear when people talk about taking a woman's right for choice about abortion. And by the way, those views are on separate sides of the political spectrum, and yet it's the same rhetoric. You can't force me to do that. My body, my choice. Right? You'll have to come and rip this thing out of my hands if you want to take it. We don't like being told what to do, and we don't like it particularly when the government's the one telling us to do it. Yet this is exactly what the mandates are doing, and this was compounded by the fact that it was preceded by really bad communication, poor communication from leaders. And so I want to talk about this idea, this American individualism, this idea that we want to be able to choose what's best for us, and we don't want other people telling us what to do. So while most Americans support that notion that every person should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is an individual way of thinking. Like that phrase, that every American has the right to those things. We are wired in this country to think about the individual, not what is best for the whole. And this is why you don't see this problem happening in other countries. Americans believe, and it resonates with them, from the belief that every single life is worthy and worth saving. And we have and will expend unbelievable amount of resources to save just one person's life. And if you work in healthcare, I don't have to tell you this is true, right? You've seen cancer patients who receive crazy high cost treatments despite very low chances of survival. Why? Because it's a life that we can save. We can save an individual life. Or the trauma patient who comes in who also has a low likelihood of survival, getting pumped full of blood, products that we can imagine, and going to interventional radiology and then to the operating room and then to the ICU. And we know coming in when they get there that they have almost no chance of surviving. And we will work as hard as we possibly can to save one person's life in this country. That is how we are wired ethically. Why? Because we have an individual view of ethics. And in America, you can do what you want until it crosses the line of stepping into someone else's freedoms. That's the line that is drawn in the sand where if you do something, you only have the freedom to do it until it affects someone else's freedom to do what they want. Until it affects their ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? In other words, your freedom stops where someone else starts. And so we have crammed mandates down people's throats without explaining to them that their decisions aren't really individual decisions anymore. To them, this is a threat on their individual rights and choices, on their autonomy as a human being, on the very DNA and fabric of their being as an American. And I just want to know, why can't leaders and politicians explain eloquently enough the nuance of this problem, that the vaccine that we all know can save lives isn't about the individual anymore. It's about the greater good. Because I have seen it firsthand when a younger, healthier person gives this disease to someone else in their family, and that person later ends up being intubated and dying. I've seen the grief. I've seen the misery. I've seen the blame the person takes on themselves and the responsibility they feel like they have because they gave this disease to a loved one who later died, and that could have been prevented if they had been vaccinated. The family are absolutely devastated. They feel like their decision not to get vaccinated and to not encourage their family members to do the same was their fault, and that they were the cause of their loved one dying. So this decision is not an individual choice. And I'm seeing it in my own life with my own eyes and hearing it with my own ears. And patients and people are slowly and painfully starting to understand that this isn't about you. It's not about your individual choice. This is about the patients who are being intubated, sedated, and on drips to keep them alive in a community hospital that's not built to do that on regular hospital floors. They're not in intensive care units. This is about the cancer patients who are having their surgeries being canceled, and we're having to tell family members, I'm sorry, I know that's really bad, and yes, the cancer can get worse, but we just don't have the ability to do the surgery right now. It's about those who can't get vaccinated because of age or medical restrictions and protecting them. It's about our healthcare workers who, honestly, we're exhausted. We're burned out. We're at our wits' end trying to save the lives of countless number of Americans, some of who are ending their own lives. Some doctors are ending their own lives because of the trauma emotionally that's being caused by this pandemic. It's not just about you anymore. We need to understand that while individual choice is as much in our DNA, and it's as much in my DNA as it is in yours, this isn't an individual choice anymore. And I recognize that this is a completely new way of thinking for most Americans. New problems do require new ways of thinking, though, right? And what is needed right now is a view of ethics where we no longer focus on whether we should get a vaccine based on what is best for me and start to think about this in terms of what is best for everyone. What is best for my family? What is best for the cancer patients? What's best for other people who can't get the vaccine right now? What's best for the doctors who are killing themselves because of what's happened in this pandemic? Because I know a lot of people in my own community who are not getting vaccinated, not because they're bad people, but because they feel like they are otherwise healthy and that the vaccine should go to those who really need it. I mean, there are really good people who feel that way. They legitimately are concerned about side effects that they've looked into and that they've heard in their echo chamber and that they don't realize aren't nearly as real as the disease we're seeing in the hospital. And fortunately, there are more than enough vaccines to go around in this country. But this isn't stopping people from feeling like they are young and healthy enough to not require it. And yet, that doesn't matter when you're less than 40 or 45 and you end up on ECMO, where we have to cannulate large blood vessels in your body so that we have a machine that performs the job of your lungs because your lungs can't do it anymore, in otherwise healthy patients. Like, these people didn't come in. They weren't like brittle diabetics and, having, a history of an MI and coronary disease and strokes. Like, some of these patients are otherwise healthy and ending up on ECMO because they didn't get a vaccine. And so these people aren't bad people. We need to stop shaming them. We're all on the same team here, and let's work together to make sure things like this don't keep happening. Because if you're listening to this show right now, I hope you are truly and critically examining whether you should get a vaccine or not. And I want you to think about framing this question not just in terms of what is best for me and am I healthy enough to not need it, but I want you to start thinking about other people in your life, because there are other people in your life that you care about, in your community that you love, friends and family. And if you have family members who are thinking through this problem too, I hope that you share this show with them, and that when you do, that you don't shame them. I hope that you listen to their concerns, try to hear what they're saying. It's like Stephen Covey would say, right? First understand, then be understood. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So please actually listen to people's concerns before you start telling them everything that you think and why they're wrong. That's never helpful. And then share some of your own stories with them. Share it on social media. Share it in person. Go on news networks. Do whatever you need to do. Tell them the stories of what you're seeing in medicine. Tell them the stories about the cancer patients who are having their surgeries canceled because we have nowhere to put them after surgery, or the healthy patients that are getting intubated and that end up in the ICU and end up dying, or the devastated family member who can't believe they gave the virus to their family member. Tell them about the patients who are asking for the vaccine right before they get intubated and are having to be told it's too late. I'm sorry, there's nothing that you can do now. That there was a 90% chance we could have prevented what was going on, but it's too late. And how patients are having to be sedated and paralyzed by medications just so that we can breathe for them. And they're having to be flipped over on their face down in the hospital while they're on a ventilator because that's the only way we can get oxygen to their body. And sometimes even that doesn't work. About the grief that people are having when they realize that they're young and healthy and then get the disease to their family member who didn't get vaccinated because they didn't have the conversation. The devastation that this disease is causing is surreal. This is an ethical, emotional problem at this point. And I'm not sure if this show, honestly, was more for you or for me, just trying to process through this. I just know that I'm tired of seeing people die from a disease that is, at this point, largely preventable. So please consider getting a shot. Please consider getting a vaccine. And if you have questions, talk to your doctor about it. I mean, shoot, you can shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to talk with you through some of this decision. We, as a country, need to listen more and shame people less. Start sharing our stories, because you're not going to overwhelm people or beat them over the head with facts that are going to help them make this decision. They need to understand this is a very human problem at this point, that people are dying, and it's preventable. And the catastrophic downstream effects of an individual's choice on other people. This isn't just about each of us individually anymore. This is about our community and our country as a whole, and about thinking about other people. And so I hope that this was in some way, shape, or form helpful for you. And I hope that you have heard some of these stories. And I encourage you to listen to more and to be resourceful. And I respect you for making conscious decisions about your body. But I also hope that you will learn to realize that this isn't an individual disease anymore, that this is a fight that we're all fighting together, that we're on the same team. All right, guys. So it's time that we stop shaming people who aren't vaccinated and start listening so that we can help them make a conscious, deliberate decision that is best for not only them, but for everyone involved. All right, everybody. I'll see you next week. Until then, start before you're ready. Start by starting. Start now. Take care.